Welcome to South Central Regional Library's Safe Inside Your Walls programming, supported by Safe at Home Manitoba. Today, I am pleased to welcome poet and author Joanna Lilley as our special guest. Originally from the United Kingdom, Joanna now lives in Whitehorse, Yukon. She is the author of 5 books, including her most recent collection of poetry called Endlings. She's published 2 previous poetry collections, If There Were Roads and The Fleece Era, as well as a novel entitled Worry Stones, and a book of short stories called The Birthday Books. So welcome, Joanna.
Thank you so much. It's a huge privilege to be here. It's lovely to meet you all on screen.
Great. So I want to ask you then, Joanna, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to Canada?
Yeah, I'm from the UK and I'm up here in Whitehorse, which is up next to Alaska, between Alaska and the Northwest Territories. And Whitehorse often gets mixed up with Yellowknife, but we're the one kind of further west. So I moved here almost 15 years ago and just always had a dream really to live in Canada. I traveled here a few times before I came here. I cycled across Canada a long time ago, and that was an amazing experience. So I cycled through Manitoba, which was so beautiful with all the open skies, and I was fine as long as I didn't have a headwind. So I got up really early to kind of beat the headwind. And then I met my husband in Wales. We were both living and working in Wales, and he had also traveled in Canada. So we had this dream in common that we would love to live here. And then it took us 15 years to actually make the move. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of difficulties with leaving family and that sort of thing. So we finally got here in 2006. Yeah.
Great. So when did you decide you wanted to be a writer, and what led you to write poetry in particular?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting question. I think we all maybe reflect on this. Anyone who wants to write. I can't really remember a time when I didn't want to write. I just love books, like many of us, especially people obviously who love libraries and reading and all those things. So I just always had my head in a book as a child, and I sort of was in awe of authors. I couldn't really imagine being an author. And I was always writing, like making little notebooks out of paper, folding them up and writing little meaningless things in them. I think my dog's about to come downstairs. If you see something moving behind me, I can just hear her shaking. And so I didn't really tell anyone I wanted to be a writer, but it was something I always loved doing. And probably when I was an adolescent, I was always writing a diary, but I started trying to write poetry, but never even in my wildest dreams imagined I would ever have poetry published. It just felt like how I needed to kind of deal with all my feelings and all of those things. And then the dream just stayed with me to somehow live a life where I could write. So I sort of started focusing on becoming a journalist, which was the more acceptable way perhaps to say I wanted to be a writer, because in Britain, where I'm from, you can very easily be accused of being pretentious, having ideas above your station. The class system there, unfortunately, is still quite strong. So you couldn't really go around saying, I'm going to be an author. But it was just a quiet, secret dream that I had. So I trained in journalism. I ended up working in government communications, which I really enjoy. And then I just secretly carried on writing. And eventually, I did a master's degree in creative writing. Probably it was my early 30s. And that's when I sort of felt a little more confidence to kind of come out of the closet really as a writer. And that's when I actually had the courage to send off a poem, and try and get that published. And there was a university publication that published my first poem. And I think that's probably really helped me. I had meanwhile been trying to write novels sort of all my life and failing a lot. So writing poetry was very refreshing in contrast. Yeah. bit of a long and winding path.
I think it always is for authors. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think sometimes
Often is.
very much so. So what is Endlings about? Your latest collection of poetry. What is
Yeah, it's about extinct animals. So this is it. I love the cover because it has Mary Anning, who was a famous female paleontologist from the wrong side of the tracks in terms of class, but she eventually became recognized. Anyway, it's one of her sketches and I just love it. So it's all about extinct animals, and I've always loved animals and connected with them and worried about them. And obviously, you know, we're all hearing about extinctions, and that's been going on for a long time. I remember when I was, I don't know, 12 or 13, going on a sponsored walk to save funds to save the polar bear. You know, this kind of been part of my life and all our lives. And I just had this idea to write poems just about animals and try and honor them in some way. But I didn't want to only focus on the kind of the human impact. I wanted to go back to a time when humans didn't even exist, and explore the animals who lived then before you know, we were even, you know, on our evolutionary path. So that was really wonderful too. So about half the poems are about animals that are definitely extinct because of us, and then a lot of the poems existed before we did. So yeah.
very interesting, very interesting. So, I mean, you've talked a little bit about Endlings, and obviously, you know, you say you really loved animals, and that was where probably the inspiration for that came from. But where do you generally get inspiration for your writing? I mean, I'm assuming it comes from a lot of different places, but
Yeah, it does. I think two main areas, maybe. One is reading. Just I love reading, and I know lots of your clients will love reading too. So just reading. As soon as I start reading, I want to start writing because it's just magical, and so that's very exciting. And I think it's really important if you do want to write to read a lot. And then it's really, I think, just for me, it's just helps me deal with life. So it's all about just paying attention to life, and you know, what you're seeing or smelling or tasting or hearing, and it's just how to process all of that. And of course all the difficult things that happen in the world all the time, like how on earth do we cope with that? So for me, writing is very much how I kind of somehow try and process what's going on and deal with it in some way. And then it's magical if something can come out of that, something, a product, you know, something creative can come out of that if you're lucky. Yeah.
so what lessons have you learned over your writing career, do you think?
Well, I mentioned earlier I had been trying to write a novel for a long time, and I sort of learned the hard way that I was sending off my manuscripts far too soon. And I got a lot of rejections, various manuscripts, some of which, you know, will never see the light of day, and that's a good thing. So I had to learn the hard way that even though I may have written 2 or 3 drafts, there's still a lot more work to do, and that's okay. That's part of the process. So yeah, that was a big one for me. And I think also it's really helped me connecting with other writers. So as I say, I was writing very quietly for a long time and didn't have the confidence to say to anyone I write. You know, it's okay if you have an article published in a newspaper, you know, that's kind of socially acceptable, but to spend hours and hours writing and nothing to show for it, it's kind of hard to admit to. So it really helped me when I start to connect with other writers and just share conversations and even share work as well. Obviously, you have to find people that you really trust if you're going to share your work with them. But that's really helped me as well. So I try to, I mean, it's not difficult. There are a lot of writers. It's surprising how many writers there are and how many aspiring writers. So I love that connection. That's really helped me a lot. Yeah.
So that kind of leads me nicely to the next question about, you know, if you had any tips for other writers, you know, for people, because it isn't always easy to say I'm a writer. I understand that. So, you know, what would your tips be for other writers who, you know, kind of, you know, want to fulfill their dream of writing?
Mm-hmm. So I think, yeah, definitely reading. Reading as much as you can, reading the sorts of things you'd love to write, because that's just going to fill you with joy and make you, you know, bubble over. So definitely reading, and also giving yourself permission to say, yeah, it's okay. I've got very good at this, by the way. I'm not going to do the vacuuming. I'm not going to do those sort of more maybe slightly boring things that I know I should do. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just spend some time writing. And I really recommend that. And for me, I work full time. Amazingly, I don't live off the poetry. I know it's hard to believe. So weekends are very precious for me. And so I have learned that I write first, like before I do all those other things that need doing, because if I do all the other things, I'll just never have time for writing. So I try and make writing the priority and do some writing, and then, as and when fit in the other stuff. So I think that's just really important, and it is hard, because you feel very vulnerable, and it's very, I know so many of us have so many pressures on us, but for me, it helps me live. So I suspect it's the same for other people too. It's kind of essential that I have time to write. So I highly recommend protecting that time if you can. And as I say, sharing your work is really helpful too. And if you can find a group of people who you trust, then I really recommend that as well. If you have a feeling, if you get into a group of writers and there's, you're feeling that you don't quite trust somebody in the group, then I would withdraw, to be honest, because it can be quite damaging. If you get the wrong feedback, or you just feel someone's not quite being, supportive enough or something like that, it can set you back, or it has set me back in the past. So find a group who you trust and share your work, or just share the ups and downs of the writing life. And the other good thing I think to do is to submit, to send your work off. And because if you're very lucky, you might get a little bit of feedback, even if you get rejections. And I've had millions, or I'm probably not even exaggerating. It's just lovely to be in the world. You think, okay, I've finished something, I'm submitting it. And then sometimes an editor of a journal may just take the time to say something personal, even it's just carry on, send stuff again, then that's just really lovely to have. And occasionally you might get some specific feedback, which is really helpful. And the other reason I like submitting is because once I've sent a piece off, like a poem or a story, it stops me looking at it and fiddling with it for the period of time. And then when I hear back, usually a rejection, then at least I haven't looked at it for a while. And I find that so helpful to just put your work aside and not look at it. And when you come back to it, look at it with a fresh eye, you'll just see things that you kind of lost track of when you were involved in it before. So it's just a good way to cut yourself off from that work, put it in a drawer, sort of metaphorically, and then when you do hear back, if you do get rejected, then go back to it and fiddle around with it, and then send it off again, and just keep going.
No, that's good advice, really good advice. So would you be good enough to read us something from Endlings?
Yes.
One or two? We'd really like to hear that.
I would love to. Thank you so much. And it's just so lovely to be connected, because we're all, having to stay at home. And I just really appreciate what the library's doing. It's just lovely to, to be able to connect with you all in this way. So I'm going to read, I have a poem. I thought I'd read my poem about the dodo, because it's probably one of just about the most famous extinct animal. And in the days when we were allowed to travel around, I was very lucky enough to get some funding from the government of Yukon here to go off to some natural history museums and sort of meet some fossils, and because I found that very inspiring and a really lovely way to connect and learn about all the amazing creatures that once existed. So I was at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, and there was this wonderful skeleton of a dodo, and they're quite large. They're about 1 meter tall, so it's bigger than I'd really realized. But it was rather dusty, and I just felt very sorry for this wonderful creature who was just sort of behind glass in this amazing museum. So I wrote some notes, which is another thing I love to do, is just sort of look and pay attention and just write notes and see what comes out, and maybe one day you'll have a poem. So that's how this one formed. And the dodo lived on Mauritius, which is an island in the Indian Ocean off Madagascar. And the last sighting was probably about, and I wrote it down because I don't remember dates. It was 1662, and they were hunted by sailors who kind of came across the island and landed and sort of wiped the dodo out. And you probably know the dodo couldn't fly, so it was a bit of an easy target. So with a long introduction, this is called The Flightless Bird of Mauritius. No, no. Oh, and it's from the point of view of the dodo, the dusty dodo. Sorry, I'll start again. No, no. I have nothing to say. No need. Everyone knows me. There is no requirement to register, remark on what is already recorded. By all means, stare instead at the over-middened mower, my Antipodean protector, or the ivory-billed woodpecker, full-feathered forest dweller. What? Did you say there was a tree named after me? I would point out, perhaps, as you are looking, that this is not all actually me. I am bits of others, a borrowed carpal, vertebral rib, an ersatz ulna. My maxilla and mandible are mine, my patelli left and right. I wouldn't be myself without my kneecaps. There's no mention of the size of my kneecaps, how I ran over rocks and roots across the palm savanna into ebony shade. Such injustice, necrotic silence. You like your lie that I was clumsy, plump, and bumbled into nullity. If I were asked, thank you, I would only say, there is no air here, just dust, this itching skull cap, proving familiarity's neglect. And I cannot digest, I cannot form flesh to cover this ghastly cage. I need my gizzard stones. No one thought to pick those out of the mud on my hot island when they dug up my bones. You are not the only ones who need tools, who without them would be as obliterated as me. Thank you. That's my dodo poem. Shall I read one more?
Yes, please. Why don't
Okay, you got time? Yeah. Okay, this one's a lot shorter. This one's about the Javan tiger. And so the Javan tiger, there's 9 subspecies of tigers and there are 6 left. So the Javan tiger is a subspecies that's now extinct, but there is good news about tigers. There are about 4,000 tigers in the world. That's not a huge number, of course, but there seems to be quite a lot of hope that we won't lose them. And this particular, the Javan tiger, was listed as extinct in 2003. So a more recent extinction, definitely, unfortunately, because of humans. Again, like the dodo, we kind of invaded their habitat for agricultural reasons and so on. So, and I will just mention that I wrote this poem quite quickly, and then I fiddled with it a lot. But sometimes, occasionally, poems will just come out fairly much in a flow, which is really, really magical when it happens, which is very rare. But I realized a while after I'd written it that actually, I think I had the William Blake poem in mind, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. So I just feel I have to acknowledge that if it sounds a little echoey of that beautiful poem. So this one's called Beauty. There's a rumor about beauty, its long whiskers and golden eyes, its stripes as dark as the moon shadows of trees. There's a rumor that the forest took the beauty, that the people who took the forest took the beauty. The beauty's stripes tightened, sliced right through. The people said they had nothing to do with it. The whiskers caught fire and the golden eyes burned right through. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Joanna. Thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us. And thank you also for sharing a little bit about your journey as a writer, which I think is very interesting for people. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. And we will include a link to Joanna's webpage, joannalilley.com, at the end of this video. And if you go there, you'll be able to find some other readings and also details of how you can get your hands on Joanna's books. So thank you again for joining us in this Safe at Home Manitoba presentation. And we hope that you all stay safe within your walls.